Alright, so in a sandbox where we've got Synthos, Worm God Caress pretty much dominating the Strand Titan landscape, you know, 1-2 punch shotgun, tractor cannon, navigator, all that good stuff. Banner of War. What are we doing on Abeyant Leaps? Is this copium? I mean, Suspend was nerfed, right? So what are we doing here? Well, as you can see from the opening clip there in the thumbnail of the video, we can still have back-to-back suspends and be suspending enemies basically every second. And it just requires a little bit of extra consideration when build crafting into a Suspend Titan build. So as you can see here, we're using Abeyant Leaps with the help of WishKeeper, Dringer's Lash, and Thread of Mind and Continuity. Those are basically the 4 or 5 ingredients that make the Suspend Titan build work today. As far as the Suspend Nerf that I'm talking about, well, prior to this season, and actually prior to Banner of War being released, this build pretty much dominated as far as Strand Titans go, and as far as crowd control builds. Like, this was on par with Shadebinder. I would say those two builds, Stasis Warlock, Strand Titan, were basically the two kings of crowd control in endgame activities for PvE. So, and you know, a lot of people just kind of put the Suspend Titan build by the wayside when we got Banner of War and all the broken ability spam with melees and whatnot. However, a lot of this Suspend Nerf was a little bit over dramatized. I mean, the nerf did hit Suspend, and all it did was reduce the duration the enemies are suspended for, and primarily on champions, right? So it's not as viable on champions anymore. You used to be able to suspend champs for like 7 seconds or maybe even longer. Now they've made it so that they're just very briefly suspended, kind of like a freeze, right? Like, you can't freeze champions for multiple seconds. They'll just kind of shatter out of it. Well, they'll just drop out of the suspend now, right? But you can still suspend any enemies that aren't champions or bosses. You can still suspend them for up to 7 seconds, I believe. It's 5, 6, 7 seconds, something like that, if you're using Thread of Continuity, which is plenty enough time to take care of those enemies or ignore them and take care of another enemy and come back to them. So I mean, Suspend is still a very viable crowd control option. And I think Bungie is kind of trying to steer us in a new direction for build crafting. And I say this in light of all of the ability nerfs that we've seen recently this season, with especially with things to like combat mods like bolstering detonation and bomber and momentum transfer and focusing strike, impact induction. A lot of those, even the kickstart mods, a lot of those mods have been heavily nerfed, so that they're basically working on a percentage basis of chunk ability regen instead of just like a flat amount, right? So like, it used to be that bomber would give you, like, you know, nearly a quarter of your class ability energy, or your grenade back on class ability expenditure, right? Well, now it only gives you a percentage based on what your actual cooldown is, so you get far less. So chunk ability regen is not as viable anymore, so you can't spam stuff as easily as you could before. But I think Bungie is trying to basically make more build crafting investments in order to get similar, ability spam like we had prior to all the nerfs. And what I'm talking about is, like, we got WishKeeper this season with the exotic Star-Crossed mission, and WishKeeper basically undoes the Suspend Nerf to, like, the Abeyant Leaps Titan build, right? So when we got the Suspend Nerf, and which also accompanied a nerf to Thread of Generation, so that we weren't able to spam as many shackle grenades, you know, the build got nerfed the way we know it. But then we got WishKeeper, which you can put down a suspending trap, the Snare Weaver trap, basically every few kills. Like one precision kill will get you 2 charges of Snare Weaver, and I think it's 6 charges that you need to put down another trap. The trap sits there on the ground for several seconds, and anytime an enemy walks through the trap, they get suspended for a duration that's relevant to threat of continuity and just the general suspend uptime, right? So you can have a trap down on the ground for, like, say 5-6 seconds or however long it lasts, and if an enemy walks through the trap on the last second, well, they're going to be suspended for several seconds, right? So technically you have a lot of suspend uptime between your trap, between the enemies actually being suspended, and your Dringer's Lash, with your barricade and your Bayonet Leaps. So the solution to get around the nerf to the build, is to actually pair Bayonet Leaps with WishKeeper. And the build basically exists now using these 2 exotics together the way it did before all of the nerfs. So, and like I said, a Bayonet Leaps was never nerfed, right? A Bayonet Leaps, one of the strongest things about it isn't the fact that it gives you 3 suspending lashes out of your barricade, and I believe the lashes travel further and more aggressively. It is a very, it's a very good aspect about a Bayonet Leaps, but the major thing is that you actually get woven mail anytime you suspend enemies. So as long as you can suspend, you will always have woven mail, right? And so still, we still have Banner of War, we still have Syntheseps, we still have Worm Gods, so why on earth would I even want to be on a suspend build when I could just be on, Synthos? Well, it's pretty simple. Not every single build favors a melee build, right? You're gonna go grapple melee into a whole spawn of Cursed Thrall. Well, it's not gonna end very well, right? So Strand Titan, for its 1-2 punch melee build, has its application for doing certain boss damage, stuff like that, but it's not always practical. But the crowd control version of Strand Titan, such as this one, generally has some more applicability to most people's gameplay style, right? So it's still very viable, and that's what I'm going over in this video. So Bayonet Leaps gives us, wider area of suspend, and it gives us woven mail, whether we're using Dranger's Lash or our Snare Weaver from WishKeeper. It doesn't matter. However we suspend enemies, we're going to get woven mail. Okay, and we're going to be taking Rally Barricade so that we get a shorter cooldown on our barricade so we can suspend more often. And then the other thing that you want to use with Bayonet Leaps is Threat of Mind. Right, we always want to have Threat of Mind. Basically, whenever we're doing a class ability based build on Strand, you want Threat of Mind, because that's going to give you class ability regeneration on suspended enemy kills, right? So if you saw from the opening clips, I got my barricade back in like 3 seconds just from killing a few adds that were suspended. So it's super fast. With Dranger's Lash alone, and your Rally Barricade and Threat of Mind, that already gives you pretty much back-to-back suspense. So very good. You definitely want to take Threat of Mind. Now, another part of the build that we can consider is what don't we need, right? Because we obviously want to optimize this build as much as possible and not just pigeonhole it into like doing one single thing. We want to have a little bit of versatility so we can cover our bases a little bit better, right? Because if we're only just suspending all the time, then we're not killing very efficiently either. So what don't we need if we're running this build? Well, we don't need shackle grenades, and that might be counterintuitive to hear because, well, you think this is a suspend build, how could you not be using shackle grenades? Well, the reality is shackle grenades are on a 2 minute and 32 second cooldown compared to our rally barricade, which is like under 40 seconds, and then with Threat of Mind it's every few seconds. And Threat of Generation, which gives us our grenade back faster, was nerfed. So even with Threat of Generation working in the background, giving us our grenade back faster, you're still going to be waiting quite a long time on your shackle grenade. I mean, dramatically compared to being able to put down your barricade or a snare weaver trap from WishKeeper. Like, the shackle grenade is the weakest suspend tool for this build. So that means that we can potentially use a different type of grenade. So that's why you can see I constantly throwing threadling grenades here, and I'll go into that as well. But what else don't we need? We don't need Threat of Warding with this build, because like I said, we're getting woven mail from our back-to-back suspends, right? Basically, if we can't suspend enemies, we can't get woven mail. So as long as we ensure that we're always suspending enemies, then we're always going to have that damage resistance from woven mail. So it means we don't need to use Threat of Warding, which means now we've got our grenade slot freed up, and we've got an extra fragment slot that's freed up. We also don't need Into the Fray, because Into the Fray, even though it gives us woven mail, we don't need the woven mail from an aspect because we're getting it from our exotic armor. And we don't need Into the Fray for melee energy regen because this isn't a melee build, right? So that frees up an aspect slot. Obviously, the other aspect that we're using is Drenger's Lash, but what other aspect could we use since we don't need Into the Fray? We've already got Drenger's Lash. Well, I would say, I mean, technically you could try Flechette Storm, since you're not really using your melee all that often. You might be hanging on to those 3 charges for quite some time, which is going to allow you to send off a better Flechette Storm, but I'm not really a big fan of Flechette Storm, so I'm just going with Banner of War. Banner of War in Legend Onslaught is, well, I mean, it's team support, right? So you're doing your whole team a favor by using Banner of War. It's like having a mobile Well of Radiance, and you just need a melee kill or a finisher to start your Banner of War, but once it's started, you don't need to do any more melee kills. It's just any kills will refresh the timer, right? So Banner of War, very good. It should also increase your super damage, since your super is a melee-based super. You get your Banner of War going, you pop your super is going to be more effective, right? So just by eliminating things that we don't need to use that we traditionally might use on a Strand build, we've opened up the door to make this build a little bit more potent in certain areas, right? So now consider that we're using WishKeeper, obviously for suspend, right? And that's, you know, eliminating the need for a shackle. It is giving us free threadlings as well, because I put hatchling on my, is it threadling or hatchling? I don't remember. I think it's, yeah, hatchling is the perk, right? So on precision kills, I make a threadling. Overall, I would say that's just the best exotic perk to put on your WishKeeper if you haven't fully crafted it yet. I think it's better than the other options. So we've got threadlings from our bow, and we've got threadlings from the seasonal artifact, right? Because there's a lot of things in the seasonal artifact that will benefit certain builds or subclasses greatly, right? So we can't deny the fact that if you're on Strand, you should be using Horde Shuttle, especially if you're using Strand weapons, and Unraveling Orbs. But Horde Shuttle is just going to automatically make threadlings for us all the time, right? So why not take advantage of that by using Threat of Evolution, right? Because we've got our, as far as our fragments go, you know, we've got Threat of Mind for our class ability uptime. We've got Threat of Continuity for longer suspends. Also, it gives us longer sever duration, longer unraveling, you know, from those unraveling orbs. And then the other 2 fragments that we could use here are basically optional, right? So I'm using Threat of Evolution so that threadlings will travel further and deal more damage, right? Because we've got Horde Shuttle, we've got Hatchling on our bow, and then I'm using the threadling grenade. So like I said, our grenade option is open since we don't need the shackle grenade. So I can use the threadling grenade, and that's going to passively do damage for me as I'm focusing on crowd control, right? So that way the build is actually a lot more effective. It's not purely based on crowd control. I can actually do some damage at the same time. So again, threadling grenades, hatchling on the bow, and horde shuttle from the seasonal artifact. So Thread of Evolution is actually, you know, very optimized for this build, and because of that, I'm also using Thread of Generation, because having better grenade cooldown is just, you know, I mean, you can't complain about that. If you wanted to use something else, you could definitely swap out Generation, but if you are going to use any weapon with hatchling, or if you're going to use horde shuttle or threadling grenades, then you should definitely be using Thread of Evolution, right? Then because we're using unraveling orbs, it means that we don't necessarily need anti-barrier weapons, because unraveling rounds actually pierce barrier shields. So I actually did this run without any anti-barrier weapons, although I would recommend you to use an anti-barrier weapon if you're not super confident about picking up an orb. The other option too is, because we're on a suspend build, we could suspend the champion, and even though the barrier will be suspended for just a few seconds, if you have a good heavy option or a good way to nuke the barrier, then you can definitely get away without even using unraveling orbs for a barrier. Let me just check what else I have noted here. Alright, so as far as our combat mods go, because I haven't really discussed too much yet about how to actually get your back-to-back class ability. Your Snare Weaver is pretty straightforward, obviously, right? You get precision hits, you get precision kills, you build up your Snare Weaver fast, you can put down those traps pretty frequently. But to get your barricade back-to-back, even without Thread of Mind, we can get a little extra help from our combat mods. So I find, since all of the nerfs that Bungie put in for your ability spam combat mods, I've found that the secret sauce, so to speak, is to use one kickstart mod. So for this build, because we need to spam our barricade, I'm using utility kickstart on my class item, and along with that kickstart mod, you want to use one copy of Charged Up. That's going to allow you to hold 4 stacks of armor charge, and then optionally you can use stacks on stacks and or elemental charge. I'm just using stacks on stacks here, so that way I get up to my 4 stacks of armor charge quicker. When I spend my class ability, it gives me about 35% of my class ability back on spend from the kickstart, right? Then you can also use like orb mods, so when you pick up an orb of power, you get class ability energy. And then I'm using Caraxus's Distress here because grenade launchers are overcharged, and Surrounded has very good synergy with Suspend. You can suspend a group of enemies, be surrounded by them, do a bunch of boss damage. Wilder Flight here is just for the option of blinding enemies when needed. So that's basically it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.